You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Duncan Hwang, Interim Co-Director of the Asian Pacific Network of Oregon, and Gauri Rajbaidya, Architect and Senior Associate at SERA. We talk about community-driven development in Portland's Jade District and how it's connected to the rest of the region. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Railvolution and appeared first on the Railvolution podcast. You can find the Railvolution podcast on your podcatcher of choice. To learn more or to attend the virtual conference this October 19th through 21st, visit railvolution.org/conference. For a 10% discount, use the code TalkingHeadways21 when you register. That's TalkingHeadways21, no spaces. Join the conversation and sign up today at railvolution.org/conference. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous Patreon supporters. Thanks so much for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. To join this merry band of infrastructure nerds and zoning wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our bus-only scarves. The fall is almost here, so get one to warm your transit-loving heart today. Go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Today's podcast is also brought to you by the projects of The Overhead Wire, including our 15-year-old Daily Cities newsletter, Read Around the World. We pull the best news about cities from around the web and share them with readers each morning. It's the best newsletter in the business, so try us out for free by going to theoverheadwire.com. You'll also find links to buy the scarf as well as our audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic Town Planning in Practice. Go to theoverheadwire.com to find out more. Well, Duncan Hwang and Gauri Rajbaidya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? And we'll start with Duncan and we'll go with Gauri after that.
Sure. Hi, my name is Duncan Hwang. I'm one of the interim co-executive directors at Apano. I use him, his pronouns. I've been working with the org for about almost eight and a half years. And one of our programs is a place-based initiative called the Jade District, where the Orchards of the 82nd is based. And we work to build community power, improve health outcomes, and prevent involuntary displacement.
Great. Thanks, Duncan. I am Gauri Rajbaidya. As you mentioned, I am a senior project designer at SERA Architects, also senior associate there. My previous, also besides doing architectural work and design work, I'm also heavily involved in the social community development, social justice side of things. And because I am an Asian American, I actually became a citizen only in 2016. So for me, that particular experience and the community, Asian American community, is very important for me, and rooting for them, working for them is very important. So on the side, I was very involved in all the community-based work, and that is what brought me to Apano. And I was involved in the Apano board since I think 2011, all the way leading up to the Jade District, the development of Orchards of 82nd, and then I stepped down to focus more on the affordable housing side of things.
And how did you all get involved in cities and being interested in neighborhoods and all those things that go along with that?
Gosh, well, I found a job at a social justice organization. So Apano, it's the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. And yeah, I just found a job on idealist.org, which never happens, but here I am. I went through that whole
Apparently
process.
It does happen.
Yeah, so it kind of does happen sometimes when all the stars align. And traditionally we did community organizing and advocacy and leadership development. And then we just started our to dabble more in community development and place-based work with the Jade District. And that was really because, we had a large concentration of Asian folks that lived in this neighborhood. So we became more invested in working on the supports needed to build a healthy and stronger and resilient community from a place-based perspective. So that include things like housing and transportation and small business and economic development. So that's how our organization evolved from community organizing to community development and how to build safer and stronger communities and neighborhoods.
Great. My trajectory in this is a little slightly different. It comes from the artistic side. I play music, and I primarily play music from where I come from, which is Nepal. And I have a small band of brothers, also all from Nepal. And in terms of sharing our music, it really, as immigrant myself and all my other band of brothers, all immigrants, we play for other immigrants who understand, the sound that we're playing. And with that, it brought me to Center for Intercultural Organizing, which is now Unite Oregon, that Casey Jama and Stephanie started a long time ago. And that's where Ronald Polo Catalani, who's heavily involved with the city, started the Colored Pencils and Art initiative. It's about curating immigrants, culture, poetry, song, dance, and food. And so we had this monthly venue where immigrants came together and shared all of these things. And with that, that really brought me close to Bhutanese, Nepalese refugees. Bhutanese communities, we share similar culture and language, but they're refugees from Bhutan, right? And so then they invited us to their homes, and going to people's homes, communities' homes, you really understand where you are aligned, your own experience and the experiences of the families that you're sharing all this art, food, and culture with. And the more you do that, the more you realize there's more that needs to be done. And because I'm involved in the built environment architecture, and my firm, SERA Architects, is inherently, in really rooted in that value of community-based, place-based organizing, place-based design, making communities, not making buildings, but making communities, right? And it really made a lot of sense to then kind of connect the two. The overlap was very natural, right? Seeing all these communities, their needs for better, safer community, safer housing, it just seemed to really align. So I got involved with Apano primarily to really advocate for the API community, more on the political and advocacy side of things. But then all of that really led to the housing need, which really aligned with what I do, which is I design housing, multifamily housing, public structures and things like that. And so really everything became very synergistic.
How important is it for APANO to make these connections? And then also, how do you make the connections with other folks from Nepal and Bhutan and everywhere else?
Well, I think it's, absolutely critical for our organization to make these connections. I think one thing I think about a lot is the ecosystem of organizations that serve our community. And, in the last census that just came out, Asian Americans grew by, I think, 48%, and the Pacific Islanders grew by 53%. So a lot of the support structures that would serve our community actually are underdeveloped or, don't exist yet. So, from the arts perspective to the housing perspective, like Oregon doesn't have like a CDC that builds affordable housing for members of our community. So if you go to some of our peer cities like Seattle or San Francisco, there's like Chinatown CDC in San Francisco, or SCIPTA up in Seattle. There's all these different organizations that exist. We just don't have that structure here in Oregon. So we're really looking to step into some of those roles to meet those needs for our community, and having, folks like Gauri with that expertise and professional experience just made it all possible. So those community connections are vital, both from like creating and delivering a project to kind of building up the case and problem statement and everything that you need to like get these projects, funded.
Yeah, I guess Duncan's covered most of it, but my perspective from being as a board member, I felt like when we were organizing along with all the other board members and the staff, through and through at Apano, it's always been about true, authentic trust building and inviting the community through that lens, right? So really it was me inviting my other Nepali community members saying, hey, this is something that is really important for us to do, and for them to kind of really feel aligned with that. And then really making connections through word of mouth and through community-based, like really grassroots. It's not a big advertised forum. It's really people bringing their friends and their friends and their friends. And that's really how we have grown. And because of that trust building methodology and how people are coming to Apano makes the growth of Apano and organizing a little bit more organic and familial in a way, right? In that sense.
Yeah, I think it's all about, building trust. And I think one thing I've learned in kind of a community development world is you can do, the traditional check the box community engagement. And that we see that a lot where, maybe there'll be some emails and flyers, and you do a community forum, and you're basically done with community engagement. That type of engagement doesn't really reach the communities that we serve, who are often immigrants or refugees or limited English proficiency. So I think we just have to be a lot more thoughtful and relational, and it just takes a lot more time to do that kind of like, trust building and deeper down kind of like relationship building and frankly just capacity building for all of us to learn how to navigate kind of the dominant culture spaces and how the rest of the world really operates.
Yeah, what does that look like, organizing at that level? What does that look like, and how does that operate?
Yeah, I think our theory of change has really always been, having those who are most impacted lead the way, right? So for us, it's a lot about, political education, empowerment, giving folks the tools they need to be successful advocates, and then helping with some technical advice or connections to electeds or whatever folks kind of along the way. So I think that's how we traditionally kind of approached organizing, was like, it was like not issue driven, but community driven. And yeah, I think, affordable housing has always just been one of those key issues that has always come up. I think it takes a lot to jump from we need more affordable housing to this is how you build affordable housing.
Yeah.
That's where, it takes a whole village to do that.
And part of it is the displacement lens. When we say affordable housing, affordable housing is definitely needed, of course, but, affordable housing, say, for example, when we were, like case in point, when we were looking at the Jade District and the orchards of 82nd, yes, affordable housing, but is it way out in Sandy? So all the community here have to move to Sandy to be able to access that? Or, are the communities here in the Jade District being provided the opportunity to access the affordable housing right here rather than having to be displaced, right? And that part also kind of ties back to community organizing from that sense. It's really about being rooted in the place, and hence comes all these other things, affordable housing, parks and nature, access, safety, safe route to school, everything, it's all connected then, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned being rooted in place, and that place is the Jade District, but that didn't always exist. Where did the Jade District organizing come from, and what are the boundaries of that place?
Yeah, so the Jade District's actually a pretty innovative approach to place-based work from the city of Portland. So we're part of the Neighborhood Prosperity Network. So we're actually our own micro-urban renewal area. And then our boundaries are basically 82nd Division and about a half mile around, but it's kind of squiggly, because it's an urban renewal area. So it's an attempt to do urban renewal in a more community-driven way that, advances community priorities rather than, serves as a tool for potential displacement. Like we've seen urban renewal gone awry in many parts of the country. So this is an attempt to use this specific financing tool to fund community-driven projects like the orchards.
And that's TIF, I'm guessing?
Yeah, that's TIF. And then we have a very small amount of TIF. So it was like enough to get a few things done, but not to make any like huge waves, which, is kind of like how you would approach it in this kind of pilot phase, I guess.
I guess another example is just past Jade District is the Division Midway Alliance, right? DMA, that Lisha Shrestha is running right now. And then further up, I guess it's not necessarily a pure NPI, but trying to be, is the Rosewood Initiative that, is kind of running really, again, community-based. So it's the way I look at it, it starts at Jade District and it's almost like this little pearl of these NPIs. And if we can really have that stretching all the way to the outer Southeast, how incredible it would be, right? Like really locally focused and then working on synergy between these little, NPI pods.
Yeah, how would you connect the dots, as it were, between those groups?
I mean, we're all part of the Neighborhood Prosperity Network. So those groups are all kind of in that network, and we receive city funding to run the admin and operations, and then also administer the small amount of TIP dollars that we have. And then we try to leverage that with other, foundations or public funders to scale up our work.
But one way I can see, Duncan, like where it can also work out is like, say, if PBOT is doing a transportation improvement along Division, right? And sure. Let's say safer routes to school, it's still relevant. I mean, Division that stretch from 60 to 92nd is still really dangerous. And so when that happens, right, I mean, it's still all the DMA is along the same division line, and then Rosewood Initiative starts, so it really becomes that collaborative thing,
Absolutely, yeah.
And then the Jade District and the creation, and then you have this parcel, which is a former furniture store and then a place for organizing before it got torn down. How do you pick the parcel, and what is the way that it moves forward?
Yeah, so when we first came to kind of like establish our headquarters here, this was back in 2013. And the first thing we did was we did a community visioning process to really see what the community wanted to invest in, right? So we did this process in Chinese and Vietnamese, Russian, Spanish, and English. So five languages. And I think Gauri was also one of the key
Facilitator.
facilitators of that and helped kind of like design all these like beautiful drawings and things of like what the neighborhood could become. And at the key intersection in the second division, there was an abandoned furniture store. It was vacant for many years. And one of the huge like main priorities for the community was like, this building's an eyesore. Can you do something with it? It's just like this underutilized space, at the heart of the district. So we actually, throughout the process, had kind of public partners come observe the visioning process, and Metro, which is our MPO, came and was part of a process. And because of that groundswell support, they knew that that building was a key acquisition target. So Metro's transit development program bought the building and basically leased it to Apano for like $1 a year for a couple years. And we basically ran kind of like a impromptu community site for public events. We hosted a number of nonprofits, like bands practiced out of there. And it was just like a real vibrant kind of community space that was really kind of rough around the edges, but people loved it. And over those couple years, like Gauri's team did the architectural design, and we applied for low-income housing tax credits, and Apano actually ran a capital campaign. And that was always part of a deal, right? Was like, this building we can use for now, but like, how do we make sure the community understands that it's going to get torn down and we're going to build something better? We're going to build affordable housing on top, and then continue to have that community space on the ground floor. So all that was kind of the sequence of events from kind of this massive community vision to, the actual building that we have now today.
And I think some of the other things to kind of keep in mind also is before PCC developed their campus, there used to be the traditional Legion Chinese restaurant that used to be the gathering, community gathering place, formally, informally, if you will, right? For a lot of the community members, they had a lot of the banquets and galas and things like that. And when that went away, there was this big lack of community hall, so to speak. With the Jade visioning process, not only what the affordable housing identified, but also night market as a concept was also a big piece that community brought forth. And at first we were doing the night market at the Fuban parking lot, and it got so big that we had to kind of then move to PCC campus, right? And so when we did that, then the big space we had at the furniture store really functioned as that community gathering space, even though it was really rough, like rough on the outside and somewhat rough on the inside. So the idea that that place needed to be preserved as an anchor for the community became very, very clear. So even when we developed the affordable housing with partnership with Rose CDC, it was always clear that that ground floor needed to be the anchor for the community. And then hence when Apano came in to kind of really put the vision for Apano space with the multicultural gathering area that opened up, could bookend the night market coming in from PCC, right? Really kind of completed the narrative and story, right, in that particular pocket. So it seemed to be an ideal space for the development of, well, transit-oriented development. I can't go anywhere because that's exactly the intersection where you have all the buses stop right in the four corners, right? And easy access for the residents, easy view, and then also the access to the amenities around the area. All made sense.
And this is all kind of like a process of, establishing, your presence and, sending a statement about, the neighborhood identity and where we are. And also building, trust. Like, this wasn't just our first project. Like, the first thing that we did when we got here was there was like lower hanging fruit besides like a, $20 million building to start. Like, the first thing we did was the visioning, and then we built a community garden. And then we ran these night markets and really activated kind of underutilized space. We worked on, advocating for traffic and safety improvements. So you see all these kind of new crossings and lighting that was a result of our advocacy. So it was like, what can you do? What kind of smaller projects can you do to like kind of demonstrate like, yes, we're following this vision, and taking, the community demands and, asks really to heart and moving those priorities and then scaling up to developing things like affordable housing.
Yeah. Also, a lot of us also lived in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I was living in 89th. So just and Confam, who worked, and I was a house representative for the district, also lived in that area. Travis Dang, who's the lead designer for the building, has been teaching martial arts in this neighborhood for ages, right? I mean, kids have grown from elementary to high school, and his, seen this is another little hobby that he does besides designing architecture. So there was a lot of like that, connection for a lot of us in the community, and that meant a lot for us.
And how is this tied to the traffic improvements too? I mean, Duncan, you mentioned it a little bit, but there's also the division transit improvements. There's also the discussion about you all helped get $80 million in funding and the transfer of control of 82nd Street from ODOT to the city of Portland. How much connected is to the transportation improvements is your organizing, is this specific project overall?
Well, I would say in our community and organization has been working on traffic and transportation, for the entire time. And, it's related in that it's a TOD project related to a new BRT line, which is the Division Transit project. But I think from the original visioning, like transportation justice and transportation safety was always a high priority. And from like our stretch of 82nd and Division out to about 122nd, we've had 4 Asian elders die in 4 years. And it's on the same couple blocks. It all happens at night. They're all elders and they're like 60 or older. They're all recent immigrants. So it's not like happenstance. I think these are systemic failures that we're facing. So the advocacy around improvements to the built environment have been a long time coming. And we've been working on that for, 7 to 8 years now. And we're just now starting to see kind of the construction happening. So last year, they broke ground on the Division Transit project, which is the BRP project, and then the corresponding safety project on Division, which will add, bike lanes and safer crossings and lighting. And that construction will start kind of, this fall into next year. And then 82nd Avenue is a state highway and is, really kind of prioritized speed and freight transportation over the community. And we pushed really hard for jurisdictional transfer for many years, and it just kind of happened this year. And it was mainly a result of a decade of advocacy, the American Rescue Plan Act dollars being available at the state. And then we also had 2 tragic fatalities on basically the same intersection of 82nd earlier this year. So, Gauri's old roommate, Representative Confam, was, on staff at Apano as now our state representative, and was able to secure a deal for that 80 million, which overall is 185 million between the state, ODOT and PBOT, the City Transportation Bureau, to get that money put together for the jurisdictional transfer. So a lot of things kind of like worked out, hopefully for better, but it took a lot of tragedy to get us there. So like transportation safety has been a huge priority, and it's a massive undertaking because you do a lot of community engagement, and it's like, well, you won't see any construction for another couple of years, and when that construction will take up a couple of years. So you're doing all this input now about what you want to see, but like if you're still here in 7 to 8 years, you'll have a much nicer street. So it's like a real long-term process, and it requires a lot of conversations, and there's just a lot of trade-offs, I think that we're making as of any transportation project. Like our neighborhood's really auto-centric. Like we're kind of like on the edge of, being a more suburban neighborhood that was, not built for biking or walking or, anything like that. And we're asking our community now to be like, you're gonna have to give up some parking for these bike lanes. You're gonna give up your access turn lanes for these medians. It'll improve safety, but your business will be impacted. So it's just a lot of change management that we've had to do. Like, overall a lot of support for it, but like when the bulldozers show up, like people are rightfully alarmed.
Yeah, I saw that in the language talking about the Division Transit project specifically. And one of my, kind of hobby horses to a certain extent is dedicated lanes for transit. And, I noticed that there was a kind of an explainer of why there was no dedicated lanes. And obviously that's one of those trade-off things that kind of have to go through in order to kind of get the things that you want. You have to give away some of the things that you still want, but maybe because of the autocentricity of the place, it's hard to convince the majority.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really difficult pill for a lot of business to swallow, like give up your parking. And a lot of our side streets are unpaved, right? Like the streets off the major kind of corridors are unpaved and you can't really safely park there. So some businesses just like don't really have access to parking anymore. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to meet our long-term like sustainability and climate goals without deeper investments and alternative forms of transportation. But it is a difficult conversation to have with individual business owners, and yeah, rightfully so. Like this is their livelihood.
For the Orchards project specifically, I'm wondering what kind of design input you got from the community. What were they looking for? What were they, specifically asking to get out of the project in addition to some of the things you all were already doing, like organizing space? The night markets sound really awesome, those types of things. But what were folks asking for?
Yeah, so a big piece was really family-based, appropriate sizes for the family, units that are appropriate for the family. I mean, again, thinking about cultural specificity, a lot of the immigrant families and especially API families still tend to be a bit more nuclear, right? I mean, when we first looked at the site, it's a very constrained, very compact site if you look at it on an aerial view. And so we wanted to not waste even an inch of land, right? So which meant like trying to get as many units as possible within the comp plan of, the height that we were allowed and everything, managing within the cost parameters. The big piece that we made was making sure that we had 3 and 2 bedroom units, and even the 1 bedroom unit to have it designed in such an ample way, given the site, such a constrained site, to design it in a way that it really had the most flexibility and most daylight, such that it felt much, much expansive and bigger, right? So that was one of the things. And so originally when we did the layout, we had a lot of the, in terms of maximizing the units, we probably had more units, but probably were more 1 bedrooms. So we really dedicated the key corners for 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. That was one major thing. And then another one was making sure that the service cores where like the laundry room would happen, had some extra space. So you could be hanging out with your child while you're kind of doing your laundry, or you could, move out from your unit to kind of come into the laundry area or like community room to kind of do the homework with the kid if you needed to kind of do that. Space was very premium, right? We didn't have a lot. And so we really had to kind of really think creatively to make the most within that, right? Allowing for bike parking, really encouraging that part quite a bit. So those were some of the major things that we incorporated as part of the, as community were giving us the feedback, how the bedrooms to be organized, and so when I think around the DD design development phase, we actually presented everything that we had, and community actually came and they were really giving very pointed comments all the way from the types of trees being planted to the back patio play area that the kids had and everything. Some of those were some of the first ones that we kind of incorporated: unit types, unit sizes to accommodate families. The replicability of this particular model that we did at Jade, and I think that's exactly the piece that we wanted to see is, can this model be replicated? And in fact, at least on the other side, like competing for similar projects like this, we are actually doing that. And Metro actually took this particular development model of Jade and Orchards of 82nd and are doing further acquisitions of property that are really on the transit line, very, very heavily served by public transit, and then really creating a public RFP process to develop this into sustainable, affordable housing with, some meaningful ground floor, just like, Pano is anchoring the Jade.
What was the affordability level of the units?
I would also say a main developer was Rose Community Development Corporation, Rose CDC. So we partnered with them, and we're all part of the development team that won the rights to develop this project.
Okay, so the total number of units are 48 units. Number of units affordable below 60% AMI is 47. So all of the units are below 60% AMI. And I think we separated one for market rate. Let's see if there were other further data. I thought there was some more data in terms of how many were. I think we had some Section 8 units, like maybe 8 Section 8 units or so. And I feel like there were some that were below 30% AMI as well. And I can find that information for you.
Was there anything that surprised you all about the process that wasn't expected or was kind of a happy accident or anything along those lines?
I think just the designing of the plaza to kind of bookend the night market, how it all came to kind of synergistically work with Apano's programming to kind of create the multicultural space. And so we worked with Swenho Design and Resolve Architects. They designed the Apano's pod commercial condominium in the legal speak, but the whole Apano space was designed by Swenho Design and Resolve Architects in collaboration with us. And so working together to really make all of this, the building part, the residential part, and the Roses residential community area, to sing together with Apano's multicultural space and using the corridor, the main passageway, actually as a gallery space, right? That connects between the front plaza to the back plaza where the youth play. That all worked out really nicely. And that was definitely a fun part. I would say probably we should not have been as surprised, but I think the neighbors kind of struggled with the myths surrounding affordable housing, right? So the negative myths that are truly nothing but just myths, that affordable housing will devalue their properties. That was one big concern that really got brought up a lot. Affordable housing will add a lot of crime and such in this neighborhood. That was another piece that we had to really, try to dispel incredibly. And that, the housing that we would build would be such poor quality, and it would be quote unquote affordable, bad looking, right? I mean, there was all these things, and that it needed to have tons of parking. Parking is another one. So those were the things that we had to really work with. And it was actually, I think enlightening in the way that we were very transparent. We had very, very open forums where neighbors were really allowed to really say what they had to say, but gave us the opportunity to kind of dispel some of these myths, right? For example, I remember Nick Sovey, the ED at Rose CDC, actually shared a white paper that actually dispelled that myth that affordable housing lowers, neighboring properties' property value. I don't think so. In fact, I feel like the building Orchards of 82nd is so nice, so beautiful. It's actually been a catalyst in terms of really changing that intersections quite a bit. I mean, as you can see, there's been so many more development that's happened since the 82nd Orchards of 82nd, right? So those were some of the things that we knew there would be challenges, but we just didn't realize how much of an intense challenge that would be. So that was definitely a surprise.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that people were like, well, there's an abandoned eyesore furniture store here now, but this brand new building will lower my property value somehow.
Yeah.
It feels like that happens a lot in those discussions. I think the fear of the unknown gets people a lot of times. This is a kind of a tough question. It's been kind of a tough year for everyone, I think, but especially for the Asian community, specifically because of the rise of some of the hate crimes. How did the connections built through Apano and your networks, how have they helped people get through this tough time this last year and a half of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about our expansion of our mission from, traditional kind of organizing and advocacy to community development and building things. And this past year was another big shift to kind of mutual aid and meeting immediate needs. So we have now like rental assistance programs. We collected resources for unemployed workers at our local shops and restaurants. The community space at the Orchards, was originally intended for, community celebrations or, planning events or whatnot. But we had to shut down, and it became basically a warehouse for diapers and PPE distribution and cleaning supplies and stuff like that. And let's see what else. We're also doing a lot of small business technical assistance and support, so helping our local business community apply for PPP loans. I think we've actually done re-grants of almost $2 million now to our local business community to help, try to support them in survival, basically, in the pandemic. So, I think this year has just been, an incredibly difficult year with the pandemic, and then with the economic fallout, and then the rise of like hate and bias incidents that have targeted our community. So I think all that kind of organizing and community building and relationship building kind of became more activated in terms of like mutual support and getting through these difficult times.
Has the space opened up a little bit more since more people have been getting vaccines? And I know that you all started a new mask mandate recently, just because of the Delta, but has it been opening up a little bit more for you all?
I think it's been opening up somewhat over the summer for most of the state, but we never fully reopened. And, we were scheduled to fully reopen this fall, much like, many, businesses, but then with the Delta variant and the new mask orders and everything from the state, we've also had to delay that. So, it's kind of unfortunate. Like we really opened in August of 2019. So we had about 4 or 5 months of actual operation before the governor's shutdown orders. So we were still in the midst of like, how do we use the space, for the community serving, uses that we had designed it for. And then, the shutdown happened. So, it's still there, and we'll figure that out when we can safely reopen. I think some of our staff are using it kind of on an optional basis, but it hasn't really been available for public use.
Have the night markets been open as well?
No, the night market brings, I think, on average about 10,000 people a night. So we're just not permitted to have such large scale
that kind of scale of people.
Yeah. And this year, I think we maybe could have done it, but it was just so dicey in this, the spring when we'd be like doing all the preparations and sponsorships and everything that we weren't sure that we could do it in August. And
it's a very vibrant event, incredibly vibrant event. I mean, when we first did it at the Fuban parking lot, how packed it got, right? 5,000 people a night. And to kind of manage that kind of vibrancy in this sort of under mandates and such, it's just a little tricky, I would think, right?
Yeah.
Well, you all get to talk about this project a lot. Is there a question that you don't get asked that you wish you would? Or is there something that you wish you would get to talk about more?
If you were to ask me, I would say people don't ask us as much as how come this similar kind of intense community listening process doesn't happen in all projects? We were incredibly lucky. I mean, like Duncan said, we did the Jade visioning, and that happened before the affordable housing was even, kind of identified as a site, right? And just the way it happened in terms of like tandem and the sequencing was incredibly rich. I would hope that, this gets asked more and that it's asked of the developer and the community more to do it like so.
Yeah. I think one of the missing stories here is just like a fundamental difference in how we think about building community capacity and how to do kind of this longer term planning and visioning, right? So like the Neighborhood Prosperity Initiative, which is like the NPNs, which the Jade District of, was a 10-year commitment from the city. And it came with, the TIF dollars that were basically open for community investments and also unrestricted funding from the city to do, the organizing and visioning and that type of work. So, like I said earlier, like we talked about transportation safety for 7 years. And right now we just got this big chunk of money, but it's going to be taken over 3 or 4 years before that money is done. So I think we just need to recognize that community development is a long-term process, and you got to be in it for the long haul. Like I spent 5 years of my life working on the orchards of 82nd, and that's from like the vision to the fundraising campaign to the grand opening. And these projects just take forever. And I think it's important for the community to know that, and for stakeholders like funders and government to be aware of that. And also just like trusting community, like community like knows what they want. Like that was kind of the theme of this entire podcast is like, we know what we need. We need affordable housing. We need safer streets. And it's like, if you give that community more unrestricted funding and a level of trust, they will produce. But if you make every investment, like this is a 6-month thing and you got to write a report and then you got to like prove your deliverables, and then that's what slows down and burns out community organizations and like community leaders, is that level of like scrutiny. Whereas like if you just trust in folks, give them the resources, and they'll be successful. And I think that's what the story shows.
Sounds like a good episode title. Community knows what they want.
There you go.
Well, Duncan and Gauri, I want to thank you all for joining us. How can we look up information about what you all are up to?
Everything we do is on apano.org, www.apano.org. And we're on Twitter and Instagram, not TikTok, because I'm told it's too difficult to do TikTok. But
I couldn't tell you. I'm not there.
That's what our columns folks are going to. They're like, TikTok is too much work. But we're just at Apano News on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
A lot of the stuff I do are all listed in SERAdesign.com. That's where, we do a lot of, since you've already talked to Mark Perpelitza from our office, we're deeply interested in community resiliency, affordability, placemaking. So another big piece I work is seismic retrofit. I come from Nepal where, seismic issues are big, and all along this West Coast, that's going to be a big issue. And we all know with the experience with the pandemic, communities of color, underrepresented communities, BIPOC, poorer communities are going to be the one that's going to get impacted the most, right? So I know a lot of the affordable housing, the older stock, in talking about climate change, we have to, rather than building only new stock, we have to kind of preserve the old stock and make better on the older stock as well, which really means retrofits, saving those families retrofits and appropriate weatherization and things like that. And we're focused on a lot of that. And so at least my work now is on SERAdesign.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Kidways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and posted first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. You can sign up for our 15-year-old newsletter at theoverheadwire.com. And you can listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find it at its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Kidways.